Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Bedomy and this is Boltgun, a first-person shooter inspired by Doom and classical first-person shooters that's set in the Warhammer universe. And honestly, it's one of my favorite first-person shooters that came out in recent years. Everything about this game just screams love and passion for old-school shooters and Warhammer IP. I mean, just look at this. The game looks like it came out in the 90s, or early 2000s, but it's a game that came out in 2023, at least when it comes to character sprites. The environment we're traversing through is all rendered in 3D, but it's pixely enough for me to believe that it is a 2D environment, if that makes any sense. Basically, if someone told me that this was a game from the early 2000s which was experimenting with new 3D rendering technology, I'd probably believe them. Which honestly isn't a bad thing, because this game combines the best elements of old school shooters and modern gaming. For example, the enemy AI is a bit more intelligent than it seems. They will try to coordinate their forces and kill you with well, I cannot say maximum efficiency because it's chaos and cooperation, coordination, and helping each other is considered pretty filthy. But they will try to cooperate enough to kill you as quickly as possible. Or kill you just in general. They really don't care about the speed of it. But there were a couple of situations where the enemy AI really gave me the illusion that they were cooperating. There's this one scenario where I was picking a fight with a group of long-range specialists from across the gorge, and then a group of melee fighters just came out of nowhere and nearly finished me off. So don't underestimate the AI. They will surprise you on occasion. There is also advanced movements such as running, jumping, climbing, and one of my favorites, dashing towards the enemy. This is basically a short bullet time mode where you can just slow down time and look towards the nearby enemy and just run towards them with a chainsword. It's not a guaranteed insta-kill, it's just a repositioning tool that you can use to save yourself from falling to your death or just get out of a bad situation if you're surrounded. It will insta-kill minor enemies and finish off stronger opponents if their health is low enough, so consider the melee attack as a movement tool rather than an attack itself. But despite that, it's so satisfying to use the melee, so do not hesitate to use it if the opportunity presents itself. But that's just the movement. The important thing about this game is the guns. And this game has guns. You have bolters, shotguns, heavy bolters, plasma guns, melta-guns, vengeance guns, and probably a lot more that I haven't discovered yet. The point is, this game does 40k and first-person shooters justice. You see a thing, you point your crosshair at it, and pull the trigger. There is no aiming down sights or reloading minigames, you just go around and shoot things. And when you're out of targets, you reload your weapon and find another group of enemies to kill. Okay, there are also health and armor pickups that you will need in order to survive, but your main focus should be secrets, additional weapons, and ammunition. And grenades, if you remember to pick them up. Granted, you'll remember you have grenades when you enter a boss fight or a big arena which forces you to fight a lot of enemies. But even without the grenades, you could still survive and come out on top of any situation if you just look around the map and try to apply some basic critical thinking. If there's a cluster of enemies around an explosive barrel, shoot it. An enemy is about to throw a grenade or use an AoE spell, kite some enemies towards you and use them as a meat shield. The enemy AI is, I won't say stupid, but predictable. Which is a good thing because a lot of good games usually have a very predictable AI that tells you what it's thinking and what it's gonna do. So you can take necessary steps in order to counteract the said actions, which will sometimes leave you in a worse situation, but even then you can still do something about it. And that's beautiful. This game doesn't require leveling up or specific gear in order to progress. You just have to pay attention to your surroundings and enemies' behavior. How will you survive and which weapons will you use? That's all up to you. So in 90% of the time your deaths will be your own fault. But the other 10%, it's due to poor melee implementation. Okay, that's not entirely accurate. It's the collision detection that I have a problem with. It works perfectly when you're dealing with human-sized or bigger enemies. But if you lock onto a toddler-sized nerdling or a toad, you're screwed. The animation will play out, but you will do no damage or you'll go right behind the enemy and fall off a cliff. That or you'll end up in a cluster of small enemies that can do a lot of chip damage pretty quickly and you'll get killed. So yeah, smaller enemies are kind of a anti-melee, let's put it like that. You can lock onto them and get to them, but if you'll hit them, that's a gamble. Granted, you do have grenades and other weapons that can do a lot of consistent damage to every opponent, so it's not a big loss, but it is infuriating when you're out of ammunition and the only thing you can do is try to melee them and then miss. But that's just a minor inconvenience. The game's main focus is the gunplay, and it does its job well. Every weapon you pick up will do damage to your opponents, but some of them will do less damage depending on the enemy's armor value. For example, Chaos Cultists and Nurglings are lightly armored, so you can take them out with a shotgun to the face or a bolter from a safe distance. But a heavily armored Terminator will require a plasma gun in order to deal with him. I mean, you can use a bolter to kill him with a well-placed headshot, but you will use up all of your ammunition in order to do so. Unless you find the proper power-up. And this is where things get interesting. There are several pickups you can find throughout the level, and they all give you certain bonuses for a specific weapon or to your health and general well-being. The most common one is the damage booster, or the machine spirit. This is the glowing green emblem of the Adeptus Mechanicus, which will increase your damage output for the duration of the level.
So it's a good idea to try to focus on fighting that first before you start engaging stronger enemies.
Well, you will find stronger power-ups when you engage the said enemies, but it's all a matter of timing and perception. For example, it would have been useful to know that the infinite ammunition power-up was just behind a barrel when I entered the goddamn area. But even without them, you can still prevail. Just keep moving and keep your eyes peeled for any opportunity that presents itself. If a group of melee enemies are chasing you, try kiting them towards a firing squad and see what happens. I guarantee you won't be disappointed. And that about covers the gameplay. Now let's move on to... story? I usually try not to tell the story because I don't want to spoil the lore or anything for those of you who wish to discover those things on your own. But in this case, the story is pretty minimalistic. So I'm just going to give you a quick summary of the situation, and then I would recommend that you skip to the next section of the video. So with that said, let's move on. You are a genetically modified super soldier from the Imperium of Man. You're sent to a remote planet to deal with a demonic threat, and that's about it. Now you can skip. For those of you who wish to stay and learn a bit more about the Warhammer lore, thank you, and yeah, let's try to keep this brief so that we don't confuse too much people. Okay, where to start now? Let's go with the Imperium of Man as a whole. This is a very xenophobic and oppressive place you don't want to end up in. If you do not believe in the God Emperor, you're branded a heretic and anyone can murder you on the spot. That is, if you're lucky enough to get killed. You'd most likely end up tortured and put into a state of semi-death. You'd still be conscious about your pains and needs, but you won't be able to do anything about it. Basically, think of it as Spanish Inquisition, Communist Party, and let's see what else. Oh yes, the majority of National Socialist parties that were present in Europe, and the ever-so-present Workers' Party of Korea. All of these political views and leaders are all mixed up into one governing body of whole humanity. So I don't have to tell you how fucked up that is. General incompetence and petty squabbling rule the day, and if a man tries to leave, he is either branded a heretic and a traitor and executed on the spot by his fellow humans, or his whole planet gets destroyed by orbital bombardments. That, or he's left to his own devices and gets eaten by space bugs, killed by mummified Terminators, tortured and sexually assaulted by S&M space elves and demons, killed by orcs, regular demons and regular elves, or driven insane by demons and plagued by demons. So a lot of nasty things can happen to him. And in order to protect the said human, the Emperor of Mankind, while he was still alive and kicking, decided to create Space Marines, his Angels of Death. These were genetically modified super soldiers that could not only rival, but surpass any hero of ancient mythology. I know that doesn't sound like much, but trust me, if you ever read 10 Tasks of Hercules, you'd be impressed by what the guy did. And the Space Marines were meant to do more than that. They were heroes, soldiers, beacons of humanity's future. And then some of them discovered that worshipping demons is a thing, and a bloody civil war erupted. Because of this, the Emperor ended up on life support, and what remained of his armies split into smaller armies called chapters. After that, several thousand years passed, and now we're here in the boots of Milum Cade, the protagonist of this game. As a member of the Elite Storm Guard unit of the Ultramarines chapter, it's your job to cleanse the planet of the heretical and demonic invasion. There could have been an alien invasion as well, but thanks to Captain Titus from the Space Marine game, that threat has been neutralized, so you only have to deal with heretics and demons. Well, heretics, traitors is actually the same thing at this point, but for the sake of clarity, I'm just going to call them heretics. In any case, Captain Titus took care of the alien problem, as well as a few traitor problems, so we just have to clean up after him. Why didn't he clean up after himself is a pretty interesting question, but I think we're digressing at this point. Suffice to say, his adventure was documented in the Warhammer Space Marine video game, which is a pretty phenomenal third-person action adventure, which I would highly recommend that you guys play on your own. Or at the very least, look at the playthrough of it. It will provide some backstory and lore to the taunts, as well as the areas we're visiting. You don't need to know that backstory in order to enjoy this game, but it adds extra flavor to the experience. And speaking of experience, this game provides it. I'm pretty sure I said this already at the beginning of the video, but I'll say it again. The sound effects and the animations in this game are just spot on. They sell you the idea that you're a walking, breathing human tank. Certain enemies scream in terror when they see you, and just try to run away before they start shooting at you. The ground shakes with every step you take, and when you jump from a great height, it sounds like you jumped from a great height and survived. The weapons sound as powerful as they look, and their recoil animations are just spot on. Not to mention how beautifully rendered the enemy sprites are. They look like somebody took their miniatures and just ran wild with the camera. That's honestly the best way I could describe it. It shows how much love and passion the developers had for this game and the whole universe of Warhammer. And honestly, it's developers like these that make, well, not just developers, but people like that make Warhammer what it is. But I digress. The game looks and feels like it belongs in the grim darkness of the far future. Even if it's a brightly colored environment or a dark and oppressive interior of a factory, there's always a sense of danger no matter the situation. I mean, just look at the desert we're in. I know that there are monsters, but I cannot shake off the nagging feeling that there is also something else in the environment just looking at me and waiting to pounce. Not to mention the plant life and the occasional skeletons that we come across. There is something big out here, and what killed it is the question. Was it the enemy forces, was it the passage of time, or was it something bigger and more dangerous? These small touches to the maps add a lot to the environmental storytelling and the atmosphere. Nobody tells you to look at those things and tells you what to think. You just notice them and think about it yourself. And the music adds up to this whole experience. Since I'm not well versed in the composing business or music in general, I'll just say this is Gregorian rock or something of the two. Or possibly cathedral, orchestral rock, I'm not too sure. But what I'm trying to say is the music fits. It can be slow and orchestral when you're not fighting, and then it picks up suddenly when you enter combat. Just giving you that mental and emotional kick into action. Basically, it makes you feel like a proper space marine. At the time of peace, you're a shining beacon of hope and prosperous humanity, and at the time of action, a force to be reckoned with. And that pretty much sums it up. This game is good. You should play it. The graphic style might not be to everyone's liking, but the gameplay itself is phenomenal. The enemies come in various shapes and sizes, and you can always outsmart them in one way or the other. You can try to kite them towards each other's fire and let them fight each other, or you can just shoot them from a safe distance and survive the fight without too much damage. Or push them off a cliff with a well-placed grenade or a shotgun to the face. If you're a fan of Doom and old-school shooters, this game really is a must. There's a very decent variety of weapons to choose from, and the amount of one-liners you can hear are also pretty fun. Granted, they're not as cheesy as the 90s one-liners, but they fit the world they're in. And that pretty much covers everything on my end. Thank you very much for watching. My name has been Bedomy, and I'll see you on the next video. Good night.